Good morning again. It's really lovely to see you all here and lovely to be here in front of you. Daniel and Hannah and Ollie are up in Gympie today. There's several others away today, so please keep them in your thoughts and prayers at this time. We're continuing on with our sort of mini-series under the broader theme of discipleship, looking at work and how the Bible teaches us a lot about work, both our formal, paid, educated work, but also there's plenty of other work besides that. Oftentimes domestic work, work for the church, these sorts of things can be overlooked or not considered in the same vein. But if anybody has maintained a house, these sorts of things, one knows that it is a lot of work. Work is often who we are in some ways. It's often who we define ourselves. If you're at a Saturday afternoon barbecue and someone introduces themselves and says, "Oh, what do you do?" I suspect the first thing that you say isn't, "Oh, I read murder mysteries," or "I play golf." Typically, the first thing that we would say would be, "Oh, I'm an engineer, I'm a librarian," these sorts of things. This is not only the conventions, but it's sort of who we define ourselves. It's who we spend a large chunk of our lives being. And of course, work has been there from the beginning. Genesis 2:15 says that the Lord took man and put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and to keep it. So anybody working in agricultural fields, you can say you're the first, the most prominent perhaps of the early workers. Cain and Abel were herdsmen and farmers. But we might ask the question, why work? It seems a lot easier to not work than to work, perhaps at the surface. If you've ever asked an 18-month-old child to pick up the toy that they've just thrown down, it's too much hard work for them to go and do this. I'm sure plenty of people perhaps here have had apprentices who are less than inclined towards work, or perhaps colleagues, or perhaps bosses as well. Our reading tells us simply that if a man shall not work, neither shall he eat. That there is a functional purpose to what we do, a command to independently, self-sufficiently provide for ourselves, our families, but also recognizing that there will be in every generation those who are less fortunate, those who are in need. And it becomes an obligation of those who are capable of supporting those who are more vulnerable to do so. Ephesians 4:28 again says simply, "Let him who steals steal no longer, but rather let him labor, performing with his own hands what is good, in order that he may have something to share with him who has need." Likewise, 1 Thessalonians 4:11 and 12. A number of these verses appear in Thessalonians because there was a group within that church there who thought, "Oh, wait a minute, I found a loophole. Jesus Christ is coming back soon. So if Christ is coming back, why bother with all this hard work? Surely I can just wait around and then Christ will come and I've got the best of both worlds." And Paul puts this to rest and he says, "Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life and attend to your own business and work with your hands, just as we commanded you, so that you may behave properly toward outsiders and not be in any need." Likewise, 1 Timothy 5:8 says, "If anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." It's really strong terms, this moral component of work. And of course, Paul makes great pains in several sections of Acts and also in his letters to say, hey, I worked. Not only did I spread the gospel, but I worked as a canvas worker, a tent maker. We did all we could not to be a burden to the churches. He says we could have. He says it's important for you to support church workers, that church workers are worthy of their labor, that you didn't just sort of take advantage of them, but it's important for them. And of course, the Levitical tribes and the priests in the Old Testament, there was provisions made from each of the other tribes in order that they would be supported, in order that they could devote themselves to the work of consecration, worship, of religious leadership of the people. And of course, these truths are so often, the Bible is very clear on them, and many others come to the same conclusions. Many writers, thinkers. Erasmus, he said, "He who shuns the millstone shuns the meal." J.G. Holland said, "God gives every bird its food, but he does not throw it into the nest." Voltaire, he said, "Work banishes those three great evils, boredom, vice, and poverty." And of course, there's not only the idea of working for a paycheck, working for meals, that is important. But if that was the only thing, it's a bit of a soulless life. And many, movies and books have sort of looked at the ways in which particularly menial tasks, and if Amazon famously of recent years have kind of treated their employees almost like robots, and they're only allowed so many minutes for a toilet break, and they have to have so many packages parceled up per hour, and these sorts of things, and it becomes very dehumanizing. And even more so when you see the boss of Amazon worth $1 squillion and able to sort of do all of these things, and meanwhile Amazon workers get paid $6 an hour and treated very poorly. So there needs to be some intrinsic worth, some dignity, some sense of worth and respect and creativity and contributing to the needs of others. Henry Ford knew a thing or two about work and about being wealthy. He said, "Chop your own wood and it will warm you twice." Charles Baudelaire, he says, "As a remedy against all ills, poverty, sickness, melancholy, only one thing is absolutely necessary, a liking for work." Galen, he said, "Employment is nature's physician, and it's essential to human happiness." This idea that, well, if I didn't have work, if I just had leisure, if I had 52 weeks of holiday time, if you talk to anybody who's retired, these sorts of things, this idea that you just sort of sit around at your leisure and get fed grapes and people fan you all day, it's not really the thing that people do find enjoyable, that people do like to work, and that retired people will often say, "I'm busier now than I ever have been," able to perhaps devote your energies to the things that you prefer to do. But nevertheless, work shouldn't be just drudgery and boredom, that it should be something that generates happiness and friendships and collegiality and these sorts of things. And again, not to say that there's not stresses involved with work, that there's not challenges, all these sorts of things. We'll get to some of those things. But work should have some sort of sense of rewards above and beyond the paycheck at the end. George Sand, he said, "Work is not man's punishment, it's his reward and his strength, his glory and his pleasure." And this makes sense because, as we've seen, God works, the act of creation we see as a sense of work. We see Christ, and Daniel's brought to us in the last few weeks, Christ working. Walter Courtney said, "God gave man work, not to burden him, but to bless him. And useful work, willingly, cheerfully, effectively done, has always been the finest expression of the human spirit." These are quotes, these are, soaring language. The reality may not always be this, but nevertheless, I think there are truths to these statements, and I think the Bible reinforces this. And so we might ask, well, how should a Christian work? How should we compart ourselves in the workplace? Clearly, as in all aspects of our life, and work a big part of that, we need to conduct ourselves with honesty, with integrity, with morality. one of the greatest testifiers to the authenticity of our Christian faith. And remember, Paul said if one doesn't work, then one is worse than an unbeliever. And so in our work, how we work really does show. Most of us, we don't see each other in our workplaces, but other people do, don't they? And other people do not look lightly on hypocrisy, always waiting, always ready to pick at the threads of someone committed to a Christian faith. Workplaces know those who work hard and well, and those who avail themselves of every opportunity to not work hard. Those who steal staplers, those who take convenient sick leave every Friday and every other Monday. These things are known. They may not be sackable offences every time. It can be quite difficult to do these things, and you can get away with it. You can fudge these things. But how much do we really get away with these things? Proverbs says a lot about our work. Proverbs says a lot about ourselves and work. Proverbs 10:4 and 5 says, "Poor is he who works with a negligent hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a son who acts wisely, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who acts shamefully." Proverbs 12:11, 24, 27, "He who tills his land will have plenty of bread, but he who pursues vain things lacks sense. The hand of the diligent will rule, but the slack hand will be put to forced labor. A slothful man does not roast his prey, but the precious possession of a man is diligence." Again, I can provide these verses afterwards, but the soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, but the soul of the diligent makes fat. In all labor there is profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. Proverbs 20:13 says, "Do not love sleep, lest you become poor. Open your eyes, and you will be satisfied with food." It says, do you see a man skilled in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. In the last two verses says, "Know well the condition of your flocks. Pay attention to your herds. He who tills his land will have plenty of food, but he who follows empty pursuits will have poverty in plenty." Wise words from the wise one. But he doesn't leave it at just ourselves as employees, as workers, but also we see Bible verses directed towards our obligation to others as well. Leviticus 19:13 says, "The wages of a hired man are not to remain with you all night until morning." Ecclesiastes 5:12 says, "The sleep of the working man is pleasant, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich man does not allow him to sleep." Jeremiah 22:13 says, "Woe to him who builds his house without righteousness, and his upper rooms without justice, who uses his neighbor's services without pay." Finally, Luke 10:7 simply says, "The laborer is worthy of his wages." This is a really important thing, and we've seen, again, in recent times in our contemporary society, despite all of the checks and balances we have built in, the idea of wage theft, the idea of people who work and who the law says are deserving of this rate of pay, this or that, and employers not paying that. Big employers capable of doing so, not just sort of single sort of mum and pop stores, but big people who have people paid to do these things, and yet not treating their labourers with dignity, not treating work fairly, rightly, properly, holding until morning the money that should rightly have been paid to the people doing the work. So what opportunities do we have as Christians through our work? Well, clearly our work is a way in which we engage with people that we might not otherwise, people that we are thrust together to be with. And so that is an opportunity both for overt evangelism, although that can be quite difficult to bring up and in sometimes is even frowned upon. But nevertheless, we can live as ambassadors for Christ. We can be people who refuse to engage in gutter talk in the workplace, in the lunchroom. We can be people who say where we're going on a Sunday, all these sorts of things. Not only that, I think we can display Christian attributes that benefit a workplace. I suspect that Christians who are living faithfully towards the moral standards that are set before us actually make very good employees, actually make very attractive people to be around. People who are given over to love, to joy, to peace, to patience, to kindness, to goodness, to faithfulness, to self-control. I suspect if you wrote those in a job description, that'd be a pretty worthwhile thing to want in employees. And it's the things that Christians bring to the table, that Christians are striving towards. But of course, there are also some challenges in the workplace too. As I said, we have the ideals set before us, but we know that work can be a source of great stress. It can be a source of great challenge. The absence of work can bring great tumult into the home. We have peer pressure. Just as we can be an example to others, others can be an example to us. Others can certainly drag us into moral quandaries that can be really difficult to navigate and to negotiate. And it's easy to say, keep the world at arm's length. I'm not going to be a part of that. But we are a part of that. It's very difficult to just sort of walk away from stable employment and pretend that, we can find another job around the corner and these sorts of things. And the next job and the next job will have people. And those people may not share our same values at all. And so there are circumstances that we need to navigate. And the Bible doesn't want Christians to remove themselves entirely from society. The Bible expects people to be a part of their communities, to be a part of their societies, and to be able to live in a way that is still reflective of Christian values, while being wise as serpents, harmless as doves, all these sorts of things. There are other challenges as well. The idea of working and burning oneself out, of having no rest. And we'll look at this more in our Bible class a little bit later on. But the Bible speaks a lot about rest. Again, just as work was built in there from the beginning, rest was built in there from the beginning. God makes a great play of having that seventh day of rest. Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and verse 11. It says, "Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled." This is Solomon writing. "And indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun." Later on, he extends his theme in verse 17 of Ecclesiastes 2. He says, "I hated life because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me, for all is vanity and grasping for the wind. I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, and in which I have sown myself under the sun. This also is vanity. Therefore I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. For there is a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill. Yet he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. For what has man for all his labor, and for the striving of his heart with which he has toiled under the sun? For all his days are sorrowful, and his work burdensome. Even in the night, his heart takes no rest. This also is vanity. Robert Frost, he said, by working faithfully 8 hours a day, you may eventually get to be a boss and work 12 hours a day. Plutarch said, rest is the sweet source of labor. So clearly there's a balance to be had here. These things don't stand in contradiction. The Bible is quite right to say work is important. It's also quite right to say that rest is important, that priorities are important. Remember when Christ visits the house of Mary and Martha in Luke 8, I believe. And Martha, quite strangely, is pretty strongly chastised. Still in the context of friends, but Martha is busy, preparing a meal, doing the domestic labor. She's not, building bigger barns or any of these sorts of things. She's trying to provide a meal for the guest in the home. I suspect any one of us, if we were working hard in the home and we had a, fellow in the house who was just in our mindset, slouching off, not helping to sort of prepare, we might get a bit irate as well. And yet Jesus says that Mary is doing the right thing by coming and listening to Christ. And we might think, well, again, but that work needs to be done. And Christ's point here is that there are a time and a place, and Ecclesiastes 3 would talk about this. There are a time and a place to be doing these things. But if you have the opportunity to listen to Christ, if you have the opportunity to hear his words of wisdom, if you have the opportunity to break the bread of life, that maybe that's the thing to be doing in that moment. And maybe we'll get to the meal and we'll make time for that. But the priority, the things that we need to be conscious of, are the things of the soul, are the things of eternal life. And so I think this is a really strong warning for each of us as Christians, that we can be committed to our work out of the right reasons, out of a sense of obligation, out of a sense of providing for our family, out of a sense of wanting to grow and to use our largesse for good. But if we do it by flogging ourselves to the point of being not very helpful and being continually surly and angry, of having no time for recreation with our children, no time for working on our marriage, if we do it that we have no energy to commit to worshiping God, and much less contributing to the church, I think the Bible is very clear that we need to ask, where are our priorities? Where are our sense of proportionality here? And of course, we can run right to the extreme. Albert Hubbard, he said, we work to become, not to acquire. And so we see quite clearly that Christ, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, here, Solomon is writing, built all this stuff up, but to what end? Other people are going to take it on. I have no idea what they might do with it. The man who famously, was building bigger barns, who had focused on his work all of his life, who focused not only on just doing the work, but who put his sense of identity, of importance in acquiring things, in bigger, better, etc., etc. Tonight, his soul was required of him. The rich young ruler who Christ challenged to sell all he had and give to the poor. He had his priorities. He had his sense of self wedded to these things. When Christ says it's easier for the camel to go through the eye of the needle than the rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven, he's putting his thumb on this pressure point, on this sense that we can have of running too far to the acquirement of wealth, to the expense of the things of the soul, of the things of righteous living. It's not to say that wealth in and of itself is a wrong. Job was a wealthy man. David was a wealthy and powerful king, and yet a man after God's own heart. Solomon was capable of great insight about these things, despite being who Solomon was famously. And so in all of our work and what we've been looking at these last few weeks, we need to have this sense of self. We need to understand what the Bible is calling us to do, to work well, to work with Christian values, to respect others who are working and to treat them properly, but also to understand that work sits in its place in our life. And our first and primary sense of identity should really be one of a Christian, shouldn't it? And so the next Saturday afternoon barbecue that someone comes up and says, "Hi, what do you do?" Am I going to say, "Oh, I'm a Christian, plus I'm a librarian and a terrible soccer player and a father and husband and all the rest"? It would be nice if I could get to that place, wouldn't it? Thanks very much.